Son found me sitting on a lawn chair in the backyard, wearing the same flannel shirt I'd had on for 4 days. It was November, in Winnipeg, and I was outside because the temperature inside the house, my house, had become something I couldn't breathe in anymore. "Dad," he crouched down in front of me, and I saw his face change the way a face changes when someone understands something they didn't want to understand. "Dad, what happened to you?" I didn't answer right away. I was looking at the frost on the grass. I'd been looking at it for a while. That morning, my son-in-law had stood in the kitchen doorway, my kitchen, the one I'd renovated in 2009 with maple cabinets I'd sanded myself, and told me that if I wanted breakfast, I should have gotten up earlier. There was nothing left. He said it with a smile. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about, the smile. "My name is Leonard. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years working as an estimator for a commercial construction firm in Winnipeg, and when I retired, I had a pension of just over $4,000 a month through my employer's defined benefit plan, plus CPP and OAS on top of that. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I owned my house outright. I had no debt. I had savings. I had a daughter I would have done anything for. Her name is Ingrid. She was always the one I worried about, not because she wasn't capable. She was sharp. She finished her business degree in 3 years, but because she had a talent for finding people who weren't good for her and deciding they were the ones who understood her best. When she was 24, she brought home a man named Wesley. No. Wait. That was the other story. I'm sorry. I'm getting confused. His name is Desmond Price, and everything that follows is the truth. Ingrid met Desmond at a property management company where she'd taken a job after university. He was her supervisor. He was 39 when she was 26, which I mentioned not to judge her. I didn't judge her then either, but because it tells you something about the dynamic between them that took me years to name. He was always slightly ahead of her, slightly in charge. She thought that was confidence. I used to think I was just old and wrong about him. I wasn't wrong. He was polished in a way that took effort to see through. Good handshake. Remembered small things. He knew I took my coffee black. He asked about my late wife by name. He laughed at exactly the right moments. My wife passed in 2019, and in those first years of grief, I was not at my most perceptive. Desmond knew that. I think he filed it away. They got married in the summer of 2021. A small ceremony outside the city, nice enough. My son, Kevin, flew in from Vancouver. We sat together at the table, and I remember Kevin leaning over and saying quietly, "He's a lot, isn't he?" And I'd said, "Give him time," because I was still trying to be generous. The arrangement that would eventually hollow out my life started, like most arrangements that hollow out your life, with something that sounded reasonable. Ingrid called me in the winter of 2022. She said Desmond's rental property, he owned a duplex in St. James, had a problem with a long-term tenant who wasn't paying, and the eviction process in Manitoba was taking forever, and they were stretched thin. She asked if they could stay with me for a few months, just while things sorted themselves out. She said it so casually, so warmly, the way you talk to someone you're certain loves you. I said yes without hesitating. Of course I did. It was Ingrid. They moved in on a Thursday with a rented cube van, and more furniture than I expected. Desmond had a way of arranging things. He put some of his pieces in the living room, moved a few of mine to the basement. He said it was about flow, about the space making sense. I let it go. I told myself it was temporary. The first thing I noticed, maybe 2 weeks in, was that Desmond had opinions about my money that he didn't bother to dress up as suggestions. He asked me once, very casually at dinner, what I was getting from my RRSP, and when I told him, I don't know why I told him, he shook his head slowly, like I'd disappointed him. He said he knew a financial advisor, someone he trusted, who could get me much better returns. I said I was fine where I was. He let it drop. But he came back to it. He had a way of coming back to things. By spring, he was sitting with me at the kitchen table with printed statements. I still don't entirely know how he got access to those, pointing at numbers and explaining, with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who is slightly slow, why my money was working against me. He used words like opportunity cost and liquidity. He told me the GICs I'd had for years were a losing strategy in the current environment. He said he'd helped his own father restructure his finances, and it had changed everything for him. I'm not a stupid man. I want to say that clearly. I spent 3 decades reading contracts and cost projections, and I know how to read a document. But grief does something to your precision, and Ingrid sitting across from me, nodding gently, agreeing with everything Desmond said, that did something to me too. I didn't want to be the difficult one. I didn't want to be the old man who couldn't adapt. I signed a power of attorney in April of 2023. I want to be honest about that, because some people reading this will want to ask why, and the honest answer is that I trusted my daughter, and I believed that her husband, whatever I thought of him personally, would not steal from her father. I believed that family was still the boundary that held. It wasn't. The POA gave Desmond authority to manage my financial affairs when I was unable to do so myself. That was how it was explained to me. What it became in practice was something else. He moved my savings into accounts I had limited visibility on. He redirected a portion of my monthly pension deposit. I had set up a joint account with Ingrid for household expenses, another thing that sounded reasonable in the moment. And the household expenses, it turned out, included a new set of tires for Desmond's truck, a weekend in Gimli that I wasn't invited on, and a standing transfer to something called Price Consulting Limited, which I later learned was a numbered company Desmond had registered in his own name. I didn't see it happening in real time. That's what I need people to understand. It didn't happen all at once. It accumulated the way water damage accumulates, quietly, behind the walls, until the day you press your hand against the surface and it gives. The day I understood something was seriously wrong was in August. I went to buy a new water heater. Mine had been making noise for months, and Desmond kept saying he'd handle it, and he never did. And my debit card was declined. I stood in Home Depot on Kynaston with my cart and my card, and a very kind young employee who offered to try it again, and it was declined again. I drove home. I went to my computer, and I tried to log into my bank account, and the password had been changed. I sat very still for a long time. When I asked Desmond about it that evening, he was calm. He said he'd consolidated the accounts for efficiency. He said he was managing things and I didn't need to worry. He said, and this is the part I think about still, Leonard, you're not exactly in the headspace to be making these decisions right now. You know that. He said it gently. Like he was caring for me. I was not losing my mind. I want to say that too. But I had no phone that was on my plan anymore. Desmond had added me to his family plan the previous year to save money. And somewhere in the transition the account had become his in a way that meant I couldn't make changes without his approval. I had no credit card in my own name. I had neighbors I was friendly with, but I hadn't told any of them what was happening because I was ashamed and because I still believed, some part of me still believed, that Ingrid would not let this go too far. I slept in a spare room. Ingrid had converted my bedroom into what she called a home office. There were nights I lay on that narrow mattress. It was the mattress from the room Kevin had used as a teenager, still had a small stain on the corner from a science fair project, and I talked to my wife. I know how that sounds. But I talked to her. I said, Marion, I don't know how I let this happen. I said, Marion, I think I'm in trouble. The backyard in November was actually a relief, in a way. The cold was honest. When Kevin crouched in front of me and said, Dad, what happened to you? I started talking and I didn't stop for a long time. I told him about the bank account, about the POA, about the months of expenses I hadn't been able to see, about the morning 2 weeks earlier when I'd asked Ingrid if we could sit down and talk about the finances, and Desmond had answered for her, told me I was welcome to review anything I wanted, and then placed a binder in front of me so full of paper that I didn't know where to start. And when I'd asked for help understanding it, he'd looked at his watch and said he had a call. Kevin didn't say anything while I talked. He's 41, my son. He works in logistics. He has his mother's face and his mother's way of listening, which is completely still. When I was done, he said, Okay, I need you to not say anything to either of them tonight. He went inside. I heard the low sound of a conversation I couldn't make out. Later he came and found me in the kitchen and he said, I've got a contact at a firm here. We're going to make some calls tomorrow morning. That night I slept better than I had in months, not because anything was fixed, but because someone else knew. Here is what I did not know and what Kevin had already understood by the time he came to see me. A power of attorney granted to another person does not transfer ownership of anything. It does not give that person the right to use your assets for their own benefit. It can be revoked by the grantor, that is, by me at any time, provided I am mentally competent to do so. And I was. Entirely. I also did not know that what Desmond had been doing had a name. In Manitoba, the Protection for Persons in Care Act and the Vulnerable Persons Living with a Mental Disability Act both provide frameworks for investigating financial exploitation. What Desmond had done, redirecting pension income, misappropriating funds under POA, isolating me from my accounts, was not just morally wrong. It was potentially criminal under the Criminal Code of Canada, specifically under sections relating to fraud and theft. Kevin's contact was a lawyer named, well, I'll just call her the lawyer because she asked me not to use her name publicly. She met with us at her office on Portage on a Tuesday morning. She was in her 50s, small, with reading glasses. She kept pushing up her nose. She listened to everything I told her. She asked precise questions. And then she said, "How much documentation do you have?" That, it turned out, was where we were lucky. Because I am, by nature and by profession, someone who keeps records. I had 30 years of paper filing habits. In a box in the basement, a box Desmond had not found interesting enough to move, I had old bank statements. I had a copy of the POA document. I had a letter from my pension administrator. And on my old laptop, which still connected to a Wi-Fi network I'd never told Desmond about, a secondary network, the one I'd set up for my smart thermostat years ago, I had emails, including several between Ingrid and Desmond, that Ingrid had forwarded to my address before things got bad. Back when she was asking me to trust him, that contained references to my account numbers and transfers that were, in the lawyer's words, very useful. I also had something else. 3 months earlier, when things had started to feel wrong enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore, I'd gone to visit my neighbor Glenise. She's in her 70s, a retired nurse, lives 2 doors down, and she'd noticed I wasn't around much and had knocked to check on me. I told her a version of what was happening. Not everything, but enough. And Glenys, who had raised 4 kids and had a practical mind, had suggested I write things down. Date, time, what was said. She'd given me a small notebook. I had filled half of it. The lawyer called it a contemporaneous record. She said it would matter. The next steps took weeks, and I will not pretend they were easy. There is a specific kind of pain in watching your own daughter receive legal documents. Ingrid called me twice, crying. The second time, she said I was destroying the family. I sat with the phone against my ear, and I thought about the binder full of paper, and the spare room mattress, and the frost on the grass, and I said, "Ingrid, I love you. But I need you to talk to your own lawyer." Kevin helped me file a complaint with Manitoba's Financial Exploitation Reporting Line, which connects to adult abuse registry processes. We also engaged with the local RCMP detachment, who were more helpful than I expected. Financial exploitation of seniors is something they've developed more protocols around in the last several years. The POA was revoked formally in writing by my new lawyer in December. Desmond challenged it initially, then backed off when the lawyer made clear what the evidentiary record looked like. My bank accounts were frozen by court order while the investigation proceeded. It took 4 months to fully untangle, including recovering access to my pension deposits, which had been redirected but not entirely spent. We were able to recover the majority of what had been moved. Desmond was charged. I will not get into the specific disposition of the charges because the process is still ongoing as I write this, but the charges exist. They are a matter of record. He knows what he did, and now the appropriate people know it too. My daughter and I have not reconciled. I leave space for that to change. I genuinely do. But I will not pretend I know how. Kevin flew back to Vancouver in February. On his last night, we ordered takeout from a Thai place I like on Corridon, and we sat at my kitchen table, my chairjin, my maple cabinets, and we talked about his mother. We hadn't done that in a while. We talked about the summer trip we used to take to the lake when they were kids. We talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this. Before he left for the airport, he hugged me for a long time and didn't say anything, which is the most his mother's thing he's ever done. There are things I know now that I didn't know then, and if anyone reading this is in the early stages of what I went through, I want to say them plainly. A power of attorney does not give another person ownership of your property or income. It can be revoked as long as you are mentally competent, which you likely are, regardless of what someone has tried to make you believe about yourself. If your pension or CPP deposits have been redirected without your explicit, fully informed consent, that is not normal financial management. That is theft. You can call the Canada Pension Plan directly. You can call your bank directly. You can call your bank directly. You can call a lawyer. You can call a senior's legal support line. You can call your provincial adult protection services. There are people whose job it is to help you, and they are more accessible than I knew. And if there is someone in your life, a son, a daughter, a neighbor with a small notebook, tell them. Tell one person. That is how it starts. I drink my coffee in my own kitchen now. I repaired the water heater in March. The maple cabinets still look good, even after 15 years. Some mornings I put my hand on the counter, and I think about Marion, and I think about the frost on the grass, and then I put the kettle on, and I let the light come in through the window, because the window is mine, and so is the light, and so is the rest of what I have left. I keep coming back to one image, not the courtroom, not the legal documents, not even Kevin's face when he found me in the backyard. I keep coming back to Desmond at the kitchen table with those printed statements, pointing at numbers with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided how this would end. He was counting on something specific, not my ignorance. I don't think he ever believed I was stupid. He was counting on my love for my daughter, making me slow to act. He understood, probably better than I did at the time, that a father's loyalty to his child can be turned into a leash, and for a while it worked. That's the part I have to sit with honestly. It worked because I let it. Not out of weakness exactly, but out of a kind of moral confusion. I kept asking myself what the right thing was, what a good father would do, whether I was being fair to Ingrid, whether I was reading Desmond wrong. That internal questioning, which I think of as a decent instinct in ordinary circumstances, became the very thing he exploited. What eventually changed things wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't Kevin showing up with fury or threats. It was Kevin showing up with clarity. He listened to everything I said. He assessed it without panic, and then he acted with precision. He knew which lawyer to call. He knew what questions to ask. He knew that the POA could be revoked and that the paper trail I'd kept in that basement box was not nothing. It was the whole case. That kind of thinking, being able to look at a situation that is designed to feel overwhelming and find the one thread you can actually pull. I watched my son do that, and I recognized something in him I hadn't fully seen before. He'd learned to think carefully under pressure. That doesn't come from nowhere. It's built, slowly, through years of making decisions and living with what follows. And Glenys. I think about her too, a woman in her 70s who knocked on my door because she noticed something was off, and then handed me a small notebook and said, "Write it down." She didn't have legal training. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she understood that bearing witness to your own life is not a passive act. It is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do. That notebook, that record of dates and words and moments, became evidence. It became evidence. It became the difference. There's a pattern to how these situations unfold, and I think it's worth naming plainly. People who exploit others, in the way Desmond did, rely on free conditions, holding steady, that you don't fully understand your own rights, that you feel too ashamed or too loyal to tell anyone, and that you begin to doubt your own perception of events. Disrupt any one of those three conditions and the whole structure becomes fragile. That's what Kevin did. That's what Glenys did, in her quieter way. They helped me see clearly again. I'm not interested in framing what happened to me as a story about victimhood. I made choices that contributed to my situation. I signed documents I should have reviewed with independent counsel. I stayed quiet longer than I should have. I let love cloud my judgment in ways that cost me. Owning that is not the same as accepting blame for what Desmond chose to do. Both things can be true at once. What I know now is this. The moment you start doubting your own grasp on reality because someone close to you keeps telling you that you're confused, that's the moment to find someone outside the situation and tell them everything. Not a version of it. Everything, the truth, even when it reflects poorly on people you love, is the only foundation that holds. I drink my coffee in my own kitchen now. The kettle is mine. The window is mine. That is not a small thing.